We're live, Damian. We're live.
Here we are.
I should probably point out, but let's start. I'm Andy Davies, the editor of kbbreview magazine, and we're flipping this around, Damian, because you've been interviewing people all week, and now I'm going to interview you.
Oh,
So we're going to talk a little bit about BiKBBI. We're celebrating an anniversary, or you're about to celebrate an anniversary. We should point out for anybody watching this that this does look a bit like Lord of the Rings, where despite what it may look like, I'm not sitting much nearer the camera than Damian is.
Whatever.
It looks like some forced perspective. I'm about to send Frodo here on a quest.
Rude.
I'm not. So look, what celebration are we doing here? What milestone are we marking here, Damian? Because it's basically 20 years, isn't it, give or take?
It's 20 years, yeah. So 20 years since the concept of this was kind of brought into the public arena, mate, yeah.
It is, and I was there at the beginning.
You was there?
That's how old I am.
It's ridiculous, isn't it?
All right, so let's go back to then. Let's go right back in time.
Yeah.
Why? What the hell were you thinking? Because I can remember you and two guys walking into our office to tell us all about this organisation you were going to set up, and there'd been nothing like it at the time. So wind back the clock and tell us what the train of thought was.
Wow. Do you know what? I think for me at the time, listen, I was working at MFI at the time, so working with great volume, kitchens, bedrooms and bathrooms. We were doing about 60,000 installations a year at MFI.
Wow.
throughout the sort of three categories, and you know, I saw a lot. You know, you're exposed to a lot very quickly when you're dealing with that volume. All domestic refurbishment stuff, as you think. For those old enough to remember MFI, that's where you bought your kitchens, bedrooms and bathrooms.
Yeah.
You know, if you was in the market, and so I was working for this lot, and I guess I saw an industry that was in a bit of trouble. You know, I really did, and there was a lot going wrong. We was leaking a lot of money. As a big commercial business that we was leaking a lot of money at the bottom end, and there was a lot of noise around installation within the business. And I guess I was never really content with it. And you know, part of how I operate is I try to find solutions to things because I like to understand it. Just to help my simple brain kind of overcome the challenge, really, more than anything else. And when I went out there and looked, it was glaringly obvious why we had so many problems. You know, nobody was looking at standards, nobody was supporting installations. Installers were like a bolt onto a business. They were very rarely spoken about. They really weren't engaged, and therefore it was no wonder why things were kind of going wrong at the levels they were.
It's really funny to even think of it being like that now, because
I know, yeah.
Installers. I mean, look at the show. You know, the influence they have is huge. That's the same back then.
Incredible.
You know, they were the people. They were the direct facing with the consumer. They were the ones going into the customer's home. And
madness, right?
It's madness, right? There wasn't that kind of look at it. I suppose there were standards for plumbers, and there would be standards for electricians, but kitchen and bathroom installation as a specific trade,
yeah,
no man's land.
Absolutely no man's land. And the MFI wasn't in its, you know, they weren't on their own in terms of their, you know, the problems that they were experiencing, but because of the volumes that they were dealing with, everything was magnified, right? So, you know, when we went out and looked at what the independents were doing, we were seeing exactly the same thing, but just on a far scaled down, you know, number. And I just sat there and I said, this is just madness. And if I'm being really honest with you, and you know, I've said this isn't the first time that I have, is that I genuinely thought that I could bring something to the market that would be the answer to it. And being completely transparent, I thought, you know what, this could be a commercial thing. I could make some money out of this, and I could do something great. I could make some money. I could have a career that I really want and would enjoy, and yeah, life would be fantastic. And yeah, it didn't quite work out that way because we soon really realised that what the industry didn't need was another money-driven business that was going to focus on money as opposed to the task of overcoming the problem, you know. And that's why it changed. I think any association where you've got to build in one member at a time. Yeah. You couldn't really go and get 100 members here and 1,000 members there. You're literally going van to van to van almost. Oh my goodness. Trying to build up enough of a membership to make it worthwhile. And that's, I mean, I remember that at that time. It was just really hard work. It was really hard work. Yeah, it was. To convince people. It was, and we had a little bit of a strategy. Well, it wasn't a strategy, it was a bit more obvious than that actually. So my background obviously is coming from the mass market. That's what I knew. I didn't really know anything else, but I knew if we could get into the national retailer as an example, we could bring some volume quickly, because you know, we didn't have the budget, the purse, because we wasn't doing it from a profit. We decided it was going to be not for profit. We couldn't go out there and attract an investor that was going to bang a load of money into it that would give us the exposure that we probably needed. So we had to do it far more, you know, be a bit more cunning about it, and we did it through the contacts that we kind of had, and with the mass market experience and contacts that we all had at the time, we started having conversations with some of the big boys. Now, that was brilliant for us because it did exactly what we wanted it to do. We got on one or two of the big boys, and all of a sudden, hundreds and then thousands of installers sort of descended upon us. But in that very action, we kind of alienated the majority of the market, everybody else. Yeah. And in hindsight, I wish we could have done it differently. And you know, I'll come on to what we've done with AIM recently and how we approach that differently. But I think what the independents did is they kind of looked at us and said, well, that's not for us, that's for them, and therefore it's not relevant to us, so we'll just carry on doing whatever we were doing, or we'll do something else. And that was a real shame, because I always knew that the key was in the independents, not just the independent retailers, but the independent installers that weren't associated with the big sheds. So it was it was a tough time, as you've alluded.
It was hard work, and you're right, there was that. I don't want to be associated with one of the big guys. I don't want the same standards as them because we're so much better than they are. And actually, your whole argument all the time was, let's get everybody up that bit, and then we'll work on the next bit.
Absolutely.
I remember you saying that over and over again. We're trying to get everybody to step up just a little bit.
Just a tad,
All right, so when you get past that initial setup, and as you say, it was hard work, what are the sort of milestones that you set yourself as you went through the years, and which of them did you achieve, and which are the real ones that you're the most proud of?
That's a good question. I'd like to say that we had this absolutely defined business plan, and we stuck to it, and you know, we hit certain predicted milestones, and that we should celebrate it. But I think for us, because we flexed really quickly and really quite early on in our journey, we went from this potential for being a cash cow that we would all retire young on.
Yeah, I remember that discussion too.
To one that wasn't going to be the case. So we flexed and we moved really quickly. But what it did do, it done exactly what it was supposed to do. It focused our mind on what we were actually there to achieve, as opposed to that early retirement and making the millions. It was actually focused on, well, what can we do to make a difference? And that was really good for us. It was healthy for us. It was healthy for me. I was a very different person back then, I have to say. My motivations were very different. I wanted different things out of life. As you get older, that changes quite a lot. And my outlook on life and what I want out of life now is very different now than it was 20 years ago. I am genuinely happy for the sofa, the dog, and a dinner.
That's not true, Damien, though, is it?
Well, maybe not.
Because you've got about 4 jobs, and you're climbing mountains and everything else. So let's just ignore that comment, because it's simply not true.
Maybe.
I can't ever imagine you sitting doing nothing.
No, maybe not. Maybe not.
Right, so what was so when you set it up? Obviously, that's a milestone itself, just getting it going.
Yeah.
What was the next bit where you think, okay, that's phase 1 done, we've achieved that first goal?
Do you know what? I think it was in the very, very early stages. It was trying to get people to believe you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, again, one of the early things that we experienced was that we were 3 very commercial guys, and we were quite, because of the business that we were working with. We were not high. I wasn't high profile, but the other guys that I were working with certainly were. And I think part of the early problem was trying to overcome that. Well, these guys are here, there's just another version of that, and they're here to make money and exploit us, poor us, and that was really difficult. I remember in the early years really struggling with that. I look back in that, you call it mental health now, but back then it wasn't. It was just a thing, and I remember being really quite wholesome in my motivation for it. But people criticising us and saying, no, you're only in it for the money. And we occasionally get it now, I have to say. But I took that to heart. So when people started to really understand, and I think that came a little bit with time, it wasn't just, we didn't say anything, we didn't do anything that made that happen. We were just here saying similar things consistently, people were like, oh, okay, maybe they're not. Maybe, you know, maybe they are in this for the right reason. And then you start to see the trickle of people come in, and it's like
time's a big factor as well, though, isn't it? Because when you first set up, they'll be gone in 6 months.
Oh my goodness!
But as you took the years away,
yeah,
you know, people okay, they're not going anywhere. Yeah, they're here they're obviously in this for the long haul.
Yeah,
and suddenly that little bit of trust and that little bit of believing you, as you say, authenticity about it starts to come through, doesn't it? Time's a huge part of this, I always think.
It is, and you know, when people do agree with you and they do start believing in you and trusting you, it's a lovely feeling, you know, because you've grown this thing from an embryonic stage, and then all of a sudden people are sort of starting to talk the same language as you, and you know, when those installers, these individual micro businesses that they didn't have anything prior to us, when they start saying, you know what, yeah, here's some money and we believe in you,
and we think it's worth it.
Oh my God! Honestly,
what we get back is worth it.
Honestly, I think about it now, and it's such a it was a lovely feeling.
So would you? My perspective of it at the time, you know, as it's gone through, but my perspective in that first 10 years probably was your frustration in. Not necessarily from the installers themselves, but from the rest of the industry, the suppliers, the supply chain that ultimately leads to installation, getting them on board and getting them to kind of back you, because ultimately they're the ones with the money. Yeah, that was really hard, wasn't it?
It was hard, because I think going back to one of the reasons why we decided to do it in the first place, Andy, was that the installation part of our industry was very disjointed, and I think a lot of manufacturers and suppliers who weren't supplying or manufacturing directly to the installer didn't really understand the association. You know, we weren't.
Yeah, the 3 or 4 steps removed.
They're further away from us. We don't understand the language, we don't understand the challenges, and we don't talk to them, and we don't want to talk to them. So, you know, we'll just carry on doing what we're doing. So, when you then go into that arena and start talking to people about the importance of it, almost educating people as to why it's important, it becomes really difficult. And I remember being ever so, I know you'll find this hard to believe, but I found it really, the sound of my own voice was even boring me even back then. And that was in the beginning, where you're having to convince people that this is the right thing to do.
Well, that's usually the point when you're just about starting to make some traction. When you're sick of the sound of your own voice saying the same thing over and over again. That's usually the point where just about you're starting to chip away.
Yeah.
And it's hard, but getting the backing of brands. Look at all these brands you've got here. But originally, getting their backing was getting to talk to the right people. Probably hard.
It was hard. But there was 1 or 2 people that really stand out, you know, in my thoughts. And I'm not gonna have time to go through everybody, but you know, one of the very first people that we met was this giant of a man called Christopher Hackett. You know, and I'm only 5 foot nothing, and he's got to be at least 7 foot. And it was, you know, it was a mismatch from, you know, this guy from Northern Ireland, some little oik from southeast London. But we connected, and he was one of the very first people to kind of believe me. And you know, I get quite emotional about it now, because, you know, he's going through a little bit of a time himself at the minute. But the faith that he put in, and one brand comes on, and then the next one looks over the fence and says, you know, what's going on there? What are they doing? What are we missing out on? And before you know it, momentum kind of carries you forward. But there have been some individuals within the industry. Rob Nichols is another one, from Publicity Engineers, you know, an old face that's now living his time in Tenerife. Again, just believed you. And when you're on your own doing this thing, trying to set new pathways and talk to people in a language that they're not used to hearing about a subject that they don't understand, to have those little beacons of people that do believe you and get behind you, I can't even tell you the difference that made at the time. And even, and dare I say, you know, and
well,
no,
clearly.
Andy, I have to say, the support that you and other members of the press have given us over the years has been phenomenal. Without it, we wouldn't have the reach.
All the time you're climbing a ladder, you know, you're trying to get from one rung to the next. And I suppose that first, the first installer you signed up, you can probably still remember who it was.
Oh my God, do I? Yeah, absolutely.
And then the first time you hit 100, and the first conference you had, and the first
Alan Travers from Walthamstow.
There you go.
There you go.
But all these
Number
things,
one.
all these things are this momentum is obviously the word that you just used, and I think that's what it is. Momentum, the idea that you are moving forward all the time. But you've got 20 years under your belt now. So is there what is the achievement of BiKBBI? Do you think? What is the legacy that you've got in that first 20 years?
Do you know, look around us,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, I can say what I think it is. What do you
Yeah,
think it is?
yeah. Do you know what? I think installations is now on the agenda, and businesses are talking about businesses that would never have spoken about it. Have we achieved what we need to? No, there's a long way to go, and will we achieve it in my tenure or even my lifetime? I think as long as we give it a good dent, I'll be really happy by it. But the fact that it's on the agenda, the fact that people now get it. I remember, I think it was Bill Miller, it was only a few years ago, had his conference, his annual conference, and the CRIES conference, and I wasn't there, but I was mentioned on stage there, and it was reported, I think, by yourself, and he had said that for many, many years Damian was in a room on his own shouting to himself, but now that's not the case. And when I heard him say that via you, I sat back, and it was another one of those moments where you think, yeah, I was, but that's not the case now.
Well, look, without blowing smoke up you, you're absolutely right. Installation wasn't a thing. It was just obviously it was a thing, but it was sort of taken for granted. And I think what you've done is just put it on the agenda, like you say. I think it is a thing that's discussed all the time. I think the influence of the installer in the supply chain and the buying process has been, highlighted by you guys. However, you've done excellent work in highlighting the problems, but unfortunately, a lot of those problems
still exist.
Yeah. How much of a dent do you think you've made in the problems?
I never thought that overcoming problems of this scale would be an overnight thing, and I wasn't naive enough to think for a second that our organisation, our little organisation, because that's all we are. We're a little organisation. I never thought that we would change that and it would be an overnight thing. But I think you've got to attack these things. Going back to the mountaineering bit, you've got to attack it in small bits. You can't look at the summit and go, that's where we need to be, we need to be there now. Sometimes you just need to think about putting your boots on and getting out tent in the morning. And I think we've done a really good job of that process, and the discussion and bringing it to the agenda of people, I genuinely think is a demonstrable step forward for the industry, but we have much to do.
Well, there's no question. Base camp is everyone being aware of the problem.
Base camp is everybody being aware of the challenge.
And now everyone, I'm sure that everyone now knows that that's an issue, the ageing workforce, the apprenticeships, all those things are on the agenda, I think, because you've put them there without question.
Partly, Andy, partly because it's now happening. I'm talking about something that's going to happen, and people have got to look at that. Some will look at it, from a sceptical perspective. Other people will, well, it's millions of years away, we don't want to worry about it. But now it's here, we've got no alternative. So I don't think it is all about me as the reason why it's here.
Look, you and we're very similar in the media, really. All we can ever do is lead a horse to water. And I think you can encourage it to drink as much as you possibly can, but at the end of the day, they've got to make that decision for themselves. But being aware of the problem and how it affects themselves and their own business, I think is very acute for a start. But I think you and you guys have made that an agenda point. Yeah. So well done for that.
Thanks.
But look, what about you personally? Because you're so ingrained in BiKBBI. You are it, and it is you. That's how do you feel about that now? Because at some point you've got to, make a decision about what you do next.
Yeah, it can't be about one bloke. It can't. But we started to make some changes a few years ago, and we've only been able to do that because of the support of the industry and the fact that we are getting that traction, and that we can actually invest, or I can actually invest in an infrastructure. Because you're right, one bloke, it's dangerous. What happens if one bloke literally falls off the side of a mountain?
Which you have done twice.
I didn't quite fall off, but I've been up there, and I could have fallen off, absolutely. And I think, this thing is far more important than me or any individual. So legacy is really important. I have to say, Andy, as a young man going into this, you don't think about what can happen after. It's all about you and all about what you can bring to the table, and you're never going to get old. But as I get older, and I am getting older, I'm seeing people around me getting older. I have started to think about legacy. I have started to think about it not being my voice, and I think we have started to achieve that. You know, you see less Damian this, Damian that, and more BiKBBI this, and strategic advisors and committees, and the work that's happening around me, and that's something that has been engineered on the absolute realisation that it can't be about one bloke and his mission to change the world. You know, and I'm really pleased because, you know, we have started to build a lovely little team of people, and, you know, I'll say it, you know, Michelle and Chris that have come on board, and that's helped change us, and all for the right reasons. That's not been easy personally. I have to start handing your kid over to your neighbours. You know, you trust your neighbours, you know they're capable, but you still got to hand them over, and that's been tough.
You must be an absolute nightmare.
I'm an absolute nightmare.
I'm guessing you are.
No. I try not to be.
Yeah.
But I'm.
It's yours. It's your baby.
I'm passionate about it. I love it. Yeah.
I've seen this 100 times in this sector. You know, the person sets the business up, it grows the business, and then they've got to accept the fact that they can't do every single thing in that business anymore.
No, they can't.
That's always the hardest stage to move on from, I think.
Yeah, it is, and I do find it difficult, and they do find it frustrating, but they're good people, and they now get me, and they know that I'm not, you know, that I am, it's this, whatever the challenges that they will face is based purely on passion and my want for them to do well. But
I mean, I've always thought if certain individuals in this sector, if you could bottle their enthusiasm and inject everybody else with it, you go a long way. You know, and whether your aims and objectives should always be just out of your reach. You know, otherwise, what you're striving for. And I think you very much fall into that category.
Yeah.
And of course, after 20 years, you're changing the name just to confuse everybody.
Well, we're getting rid of a letter because you lot complained that there were too many letters.
There's a lot of letters. There's lots of K's and B's and B's in this sector.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
there are.
So, what's behind the name change? What is the name change? And what's the sort of point and purpose behind that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. You know, it is one that we've thought very carefully about, because you spend 20 years building a name, building a brand that people get, and then all of a sudden you change it, and there is a risk that you can lose all of that. So it is just a name change. So let's, you know, first and foremost be clear about that. What we do, how we deliver it, that all remains constant there. Installation sits very much at the heart of everything that we do. But there is a realisation that KBB means stuff to me and you, but to everybody else it means nothing. When we talk in government, when we talk to consumers, they don't get it, they don't understand it. And you know, if you think our name's long enough at the moment, if we was to replace KBB with kitchens, bedrooms and bathrooms, it would literally take us an absolute age to get through a conversation. So we needed to think carefully about what we were going to do and really the motive. So one of the motives is around simplification. It's around, you know, bringing it to a language that other people understand, and consumers. I think that's key. Consumers, future generations of installers. It's about being brought perhaps into the wider industry, the home improvement and construction industry. So our change from BiKBBI, or the British Institute of KBB Installation, to BIFIS, the British Institute of Fitted Interior Specialists, is about making that move into being part of that bigger family. But KBB, nothing changes. This is purely a strategic move, really, to align us with government language, consumer awareness, because one of the pieces of criticism that we do get, and this is always going to be really difficult for us to overcome, because we're potless, you know, we're like most associations. We're scrambling about for goodwill from people like yourselves and manufacturers to support everything that we do. We can't afford to be paying to get into the mind of the consumer. But by changing the name, and by doing things a little bit differently, by working with government and tagging on to some of their language and terminology, we hope that we'll sort of ride the wave of that almost. And you know, we know that consumers don't know as well as we would love them to, but we'll work with our strategic part, all of these people, you guys, the wider industry, to, you know, to share what we do. So, you know, bringing it into that change of language, we hope will make a bit of a difference to it, you know.
Well, look, it's a really interesting way to cap off 20 years of it by expanding your horizons rather than sort of narrowing them.
Yeah.
So look, well done, mate. I've followed it since the beginning, obviously. and it's been hard work, and I've seen the hard work you put into it.
Yeah.
And particularly during COVID, I think you did a fantastic job supporting your members during COVID, which was the hardest part of the whole thing.
Yeah, hard time.
So look, well done. Congratulations to you. Congratulations to BiKBBI.
Yeah.
And here's the next 20 years.
Andy, thank you. And I have to say, genuinely thank you to you, and dare I say the rest of the media.
Don't dare to say
I won't
that.
mention them.
No.
No, but on a genuine note, we can't afford to get the coverage. If you were charging for it, we couldn't afford it. So the fact that you do it because you know it's right.
Yeah, it's important.
Honestly, it makes a difference, Andy. So thank you, mate, for everything.
All right,
Appreciate
thank you,
it.
mate.
Cheers.